Hello, everyone. Ron Gerber from AngelBeat. I'm so excited to be here with Brian Linder. Brian's part of the Office of the CTO at Check Point. Everyone knows Check Point. I don't even know what their market share is in firewalls. Is it 40%, 60%, 80%, something ridiculous like that, which is a testament to their tremendous success in really establishing firewall technology as a key part of your defense in depth. Brian evangelizes security issues. He's one of the most respected security experts, appearing on programs like CNBC, MSNBC, CNN. He probably appears on Fox News because security cuts across all aspects of the political spectrum. Hackers attack Democrats as well as Republicans. So they do
They're
not
political, Ron. They have no political bias.
No, they just have a monetary bias and some very bad motives. So maybe to kick this off, there's so many things that I want to hear from Brian, but maybe if you could give us a little bit of background yourself. And I think it's also interesting before you get into some more stories, and I'll ask you to keep the names of the guilty hidden, so we don't want anyone to get into trouble. But maybe you could, in addition to your background, talk about to start this off, the evolution of Check Point, which I think in certain respects mirrors the evolution of technology. Check Point establishing itself in a leader, say primarily in on-prem firewall security infrastructure, and now Check Point, through so much incredible organic and acquisition growth, is now one of the preeminent firms encompassing a range of security solutions across the WAN and cloud. Brian, maybe you could start now. I really appreciate your time.
Check Point's, thanks, Ron. Thanks for having us. So Check Point's a decades-old leader, largest cybersecurity play on the planet. But our roots, as you correctly pointed out, were in the firewall space back when life existed behind a perimeter. Those days are long, long gone. I mean, our environments today have moved way out of anything, even prior to the pandemic, had moved out of the data center into the cloud, infrastructure as a service, software as a service, platforms that are nearly ubiquitous. The cloud in general, just consuming everything. We also saw a move towards enabling our workforces with mobile devices. What about Internet of Things? What about hospitals with embedded systems that are vulnerable? So whether it's cloud, mobile, IoT, or even the classic data center, where does security need to happen? And these days it's a much harder question to answer. So we figure we're about at the 5th generation of security, and that it represents an evolution of not only the number of vectors like mobile and the as a service platforms, et cetera, but also the evolution of the threat landscape as our bad actors have become more and more sophisticated, well-funded, better organized, more motivated financially, and also winning, being satisfied with their profits. So, we see both those things happening at once, and all at once. We also see the cybersecurity skills shortage, which existed also before the pandemic, but now is in a worst case scenario with the Great Resignation as people are transitioning from everywhere to everywhere else. So we don't have enough people on the white hat side to combat these advanced threats. So Check Point has really invested heavily to try to fill these gaps and successfully done so. But there's some big challenges facing most organizations today trying to stay ahead of this.
Before you get into some of your war stories, maybe you can comment a little bit about Check Point's research activities in monitoring literally this global cybersecurity landscape. And it ties in when you and some of your colleagues at Check Point have presented at other AngelBeat shows. One of the things that keeps coming up amongst end users, putting aside the Fortune 20, the rest of the world, they can't hire these people. And one of the things that everyone commented to me, they go, Ron, I'm so glad you got Check Point here because I'm so impressed with their threat research because I need to hire them because they have such a window into what's going on in the world that even if I could hire and find the best cybersecurity expert, it wouldn't be nearly as good as using Check Point because they see so much. Maybe you could talk a little bit about
I'll talk about, so for decades and decades, we have over 100,000 customers around the world. So for decades and decades, we've been evolving a thing called Threat Cloud, which I'll tell you what that is in plain terms. And that is a repository for threat prevention, indicators of compromise, and other knowledge. Now that's where it all starts. So that's all happening automatically. Where the secret sauce comes in for us and where we are able to relieve the burden of either administrators that are undertrained or that just will never have the security knowledge is through, of course, a series of engines like AI engines and based on machine learning and many, many, many technologies that combine. All of these come under a category that we refer to as checkpoint research. So checkpoint research is separate from a sales entity that sells solutions. It's a research arm. It's a couple of hundred researchers that do nothing all day but watch the threat landscape out there. So they're contributing to this threat cloud and also benefiting from it, researching against it to produce leadership. And of course, anybody that's in the industry knows that research.checkpoint.com is the place to go for this. But these reports are based on what we see for billions of indicators of compromise, sensor points that are distributed around the globe. It's the largest body of knowledge of threat prevention on the planet. But sitting alone, it doesn't do as much as it can do without the help of, say, a research effort or checkpoint solutions that are within the infrastructure. So I'll give you the best way to explain it. When we see something that happened in the cloud, or let's say on a mobile device, all other aspects of security must become immediately aware of that through different controls without having to reinvent wheels. And that is essentially the benefit. So checkpoint research sees something that's happening in one area of cyber, like on a mobile device or new mobile ransomware, which is really alarming to see. We can translate that instantly among all vectors of attack in the threat landscape as it spreads throughout the ecosystem, no matter where you are, whether it's Internet of Things or on the laptop or in the data center, in the cloud. And that cuts down on the amount of work that an administrator who likely is undertrained, underpaid, overworked has to actually do. So that's kind of the secret sauce there.
That is great. And I would imagine that the benefit when you see you've got hundreds of people, probably one of the key critical assets within the broader checkpoint organization, the key thing is you're not simply relying upon software algorithms to tell people what to do. It's this great blend of this AI technology processing. You're probably, I don't know how many trillions of bits and bytes of data all get accumulated through the algorithms to monitor things. But the good thing with Checkpoint, and you can comment on this, is that you can then provide a human overlay on that to provide insights and tangible recommendations covering.
Let me give you the great catch-22, okay? This is the great catch-22. We, as you correctly pointed out, there's too few cybersecurity experts. Even when we find one that we love, we may not be able to afford to hire them. Different markets, verticals have different enablement. So maybe a big, Fortune 10 financial can afford to hire the best talent, but certainly a school district in Virginia probably is not going to have a top cybersecurity expert on premise. So having checkpoint research behind them, having incident response, our incident response team, having the intelligence, of course, that's happening at the machine level, are all required to keep this one guy or gal protected in a single visibility. So this is the catch-22 is that even if we could afford the best of the best, and even if we had silo after silo, it's still the human element is insufficient. They need all the machine learning, the AI, those algorithms, but you're dead right. We need good skill and good talent to overlay that to have the last decision. Now, one other catch-22, a lot of companies culturally have favored a detection philosophy. Look, we're afraid we're going to block the CEO's mobile device. We don't want to do that. Look, Checkpoint or any vendor really, we love what you're doing. I'd prefer to eyeball what happens to the CEO personally before I allow traffic to be blocked. Well, the problem is in this day and age, the threat vectors we face are moving at a different order of magnitude of speed that a human can process. So we all want things to just work and we don't want to interrupt connectivity, but without a philosophy of prevention first and forensics later, we all expose ourselves to what, say, the Colonial Pipeline faced or what, the meatpacking plant or a number of thousands of ransomware victims have faced, which is it was too late, too little too late. We saw it, but it already happened. So, and I can talk a little more about ransomware and the threat to people in the way that defense in depth is lined up there. But yeah, the irony being, we want people, as you said, we want people having an eye on it, but they can't respond fast enough and they're not skilled enough. So it takes a solid infrastructure to make all that work together in a good rhythm.
And we see that a lot on a broad array of technology issues, that as organizations, given the cloud, given increasing security threats and labor shortages in key areas, they're looking to see, well, what is our critical role? Do I really need people upgrading software, racking and stacking servers? No. Those resources and limited funds are better suited in using the expertise, as you alluded to, at Checkpoint Research. I had a question before we get into some of the war stories on I'm assuming all these people are like non-Checkpoint customers, or people when you hear them in the headlines, but we don't go there. But maybe you could just frame it. One of the questions that I get asked a lot is, okay, I'm now going to the cloud. What is the role between my responsibility as end user? Doesn't Microsoft, Amazon, or Google, or IBM Cloud, don't they do everything? Why do I need to worry about security anymore?
Okay.
And then
so Ron,
maybe you could also comment on the role of Checkpoint in this three-part security model of, you have to understand what the cloud providers do, you have to understand what your responsibilities are, and then you have to be cognizant, and this is what you can comment on, what is the role of trusted third-party providers like Checkpoint to fill in the gaps?
So Ron, do you drive on highways? You drive on highways, don't you? You drive on roads? Sure. Does that mean that you still need to wear a seatbelt and have an airbag in your car?
Absolutely.
Of course. So the best analogy for this is actually a simple analogy. The Microsofts and AWSs of the world are building the best, the fastest highways, the best paved, next generation, and putting tools in place that allow the best transit. They even have investments in security because they'd be foolish not to. Their business models require it. But you then have on the other side of it, you have the airbag and the seatbelt. And you need, when you get in that vehicle that you're going to drive on this highway, you need a way of assuring that if something should happen, basically you're planning that something will happen, that you'll be protected. And that's where vendors like Checkpoint come in to say, wait a minute, we do nothing all day but focus on airbags and seatbelts to protect occupants. We're not so concerned with building the best highway that has the best paving and that's wide and has 6 lanes and has the best reflectors. We're talking about the airbags and the seatbelts. Now, as a consumer of cloud, you are entering into an agreement, number one, with the Microsofts and AWSs of the world generally, that you share responsibility for security, as you correctly pointed out. We are in an ecosystem where, with those providers of cloud, we agree to share the responsibility. So they provide great highways that are safe. We get in vehicles that are protected, and we all cooperate together. Now, the ecosystem for the airbags and seatbelts, like where Checkpoint is playing, and it's a very, very, I'll say, a diverse ecosystem that is full of foundational security vendors like your Checkpoints and Palos of the world, but also full of a lot of emerging security vendors that are much, much smaller and less established, but then are providing a niche of security. So you have a lot of seatbelt and airbag options in the ecosystem, and that makes it quite difficult for most administrators. But here are the main reasons why one should be looking at a foundational solution that can go across not just cloud, but elsewhere. So let's start with the highway. The highway is great. I'm gonna enjoy the best highway here, but now I'm gonna cross a state line. So I'm gonna go from a Microsoft cloud over to an AWS cloud. And don't forget, I got some things in the IBM cloud, and don't forget the Google cloud over there. Well, I need a way to unify my risk and safety, my security across multiple clouds, because we're all moving in that direction. Very few companies have been solely committed to one cloud vendor, maybe even if nothing else, for disaster recovery, for continuity, for assurance. So, hey, I got some instances over in AWS, over in Microsoft. Hey, we're primarily an Azure shop, but we do use AWS for certain continuity purposes, or maybe I'm depending on a third-party solution that provides services in those clouds, AWS and Microsoft. So we are part of a solution that spans multiple clouds, and also not even just cloud, but mobile, IoT. And again, I spoke earlier about unifying threat prevention across mobile, cloud, IoT, the data center. Well, we don't want to have a different posture or a different model or have to relearn expertise in the data center that is already understood in the cloud. They're different technologies, of course, but a lot of the indicators of compromise translate perfectly. So the idea here is to give, whether, wherever we are, whichever cloud, whichever highway, whatever state we're in, to have a unified seatbelt and airbag strategy that not only can work in a tunnel, but also on the highways and on the back roads and you name it, and crossing state lines and ownership. So it's a really complex problem. Again, not enough people to do it. And, I think we've invested quite heavily in some really strong cloud solutions there.
One of the buzzwords that gets thrown around a lot in IT is a single pane of glass, be it for network monitoring. But I honestly think it's true in the case of Checkpoint, where the key strategic architects, the senior security staff, it's incredibly powerful to have those capabilities. And again, behind the scenes, when you look, to use your automotive analogy, when you look underneath the hood, I'm sure there's whole teams of Checkpoint individuals understanding how AWS works, which is probably a little different than how Azure works, which is a little different than GCP. But then they're making sure that you've got the right pane of glass. So if you move your containers from one to another, or if you're going on-prem to a bare metal installation, the great thing, that's why we get so much positive feedback on Checkpoint in our sessions, is that people want a trusted security solution where they don't have to relearn depending on their architectural decisions, that they know gives them seamless, incredibly reliable protection, regardless of the decisions they make on the cloud.
Yeah, agreed completely. And I think the big challenge there is there's an ecosystem of amazing innovation. So that's great. So all the crowded ecosystem there'll be a point solution in one cloud that we'd like to see in another cloud, or maybe there's things a certain niche vendor is doing that would benefit even everyone. So, why aren't we all using that? But the bottom line is there's just too few people and you need a single way to see all of it. So that has been our mission for more than 25 years now, which is to provide that single pane of glass, not only for management, but for visibility. Hey, what am I seeing that spans across? So the technology we're talking about here is XDR. So it's an extended detection and response. To put that in really plain and simple terms, if something is happening on some mobile devices and up in Office 365, and I also saw it in a cloud instance, and it's a coordinated attack, can I apply analysis? And again, it's a difficult thing to do, but can I apply analysis across all that and instantly have visibility in a time frame that allows me to respond in time? I'm seeing a low and slow attack in one area, but in my cloud instance is something else, and over in AWS, and then somebody's touching my Microsoft instances all at once. Can I see it all in one place? And that has been our goal for some time.
You alluded to earlier, Brian, about this tremendous onslaught of ransomware attacks. So maybe you could talk a little bit, as you've mentioned to great acclaim at our Angel Beat events, the evolution of ransomware, how it is going and getting even worse than simply encrypting data and sending Bitcoin. Maybe you could talk about how ransomware is evolving, and maybe also about some of the capabilities that Checkpoint offers, not only for ransomware detection, but again, I'm sure leveraging your research arm, ransomware prevention, to stop it even before it comes into your organization.
Yeah, let me take it to the highest level. The first myth that is currently, unfortunately, believed by many is that ransomware is an attack type. It's not an attack type. Ransomware is a cottage industry. Ransomware is a massively profitable cottage industry that these gangs, these bad actors, are ganging up and making millions and millions of dollars because of one simple point, and that's leverage. Back in the day, going back many moons, the original ransomware class of attacks was based on encrypting drives, and we would pay a ransom to have them decrypted. Since then, the bad actors have progressed far past that, and they've figured out that through a few simple techniques that they can increase their leverage exponentially and therefore force the hand of most victims to pay the ransom, even if those victims don't really know for sure whether they're going to get a decryption key to actually save their business. So things like slow discovery and then subsequent exfiltration of data. So getting data quietly moved out, like customer data, quietly moved out of the organization before the encryption event even happens. How about after the encryption event begins and the panic sets in? At that point, the attacker threatens to disclose customer information, call customers, call the media, Call the stock analyst if you happen to work for a public company. And the number of these leverage vectors keeps increasing. So the biggest question we hear about, and I'll share a little bit of this is a live example with no customer names because I can't do that, but I will tell you that the overwhelming in all the ransomware attack discussions that we've been forced to face in, I'll call it reaction mode. So our IRT team has many customers that have been hit by ransomware, and they're constantly dealing with this. And I'll tell you the one question that comes up, and you can guess what it is, which is pay the ransom or not pay the ransom. Which is it? What's the right answer, Checkpoint? Tell us, because we need to know. And the answer to that question can be summarized as follows. When one has looked thoughtfully at their security strategy, and we often do this, when one has conducted tabletop exercises, when one has air-gapped their backups, when one has practiced good security hygiene specifically towards, absorbing the impact of this ransomware attack, they have a choice come that day. But most organizations aren't doing that. They simply aren't. So when they arrive at that day, most organizations haven't put the plans in place or done the planning that's required, and they have to pay the ransom, whether or not they believe they're going to be, get their data de-encrypted or not. That's part one of it. So with controls from Checkpoint, and I'll tell you another myth, and that is that it can't be addressed. Another myth is that, first of all, I'm not going to be a victim, which is completely false. I can tell you real world examples. I can tell you, you don't need to be a Fortune 10 company that, financed to be a victim of this attack. Kaseya on July 4th proved, which by the way, for those that aren't familiar, was a supply chain attack where an upstream vendor was hit. And I'll just get right to the point. Doctors' offices, corner stores, companies, these small businesses that were partners of a managed services security partner were hit by a ransomware attack, probably didn't even know what ransomware was. So they woke up and came in after July 4th and found machines encrypted. They had no idea what to do or who to even call. So my point is that nobody should consider themselves to be not a victim of this potentially. Everybody's a target. So we want to look at controls that say this. That say, look, number one, how do we stop a phishing attack? How do we stop somebody from clicking on that link in the first place they shouldn't have clicked on? Let's skip ahead 6 levels in the kill chain. Once that ransomware event begins, how do we stop it in its tracks? So it's not one level of depth. It's 6 or 7 levels of depth that start at the user and end all the way up at a behavioral guard or a process, killing processes off that are encrypting the ransomware and quarantining machines before it spreads. So it can be prevented. It can be mitigated with the right controls. We're proud of what we bring to the market on that. And I can talk more about that another time in terms of, solution level. But I will tell you, it is not a lost cause, but you likely will be a victim at some point. It's too profitable. It's just too valuable to these bad actors. And I don't see any federal legislation or international work to stop it. I just think that people should get ready for their moment and be ready for it.
Someone suggested to me that I should set up a new business, Devil Beat, and I could do ransomware seminars on the dark web because
great.
I could get like so many people if I wanted to go that track. Because now there are literally businesses like ransomware as a service. People think it's RAAS. I'm sure if you Google RAAS, that's what it is. People
let me tell you about ransomware as a service. It's actually fascinating in a very dark way. I'll just tell it to you like this. Imagine partners of a vendor, which we all have. I'm one of those. I work for a fantastic organization that depends on a partner community. And imagine a strong relationship between a vendor of a solution and partners. Imagine that. Well, it exists everywhere in the white hat ecosystem. Now imagine it in a black hat ecosystem where a highly responsive, innovative platform that can launch a ransomware attack, and we agree to share the profits. Now, what better? I think Devil Beat should be. I think that you'd have a lot of subscribers, operate your own.
I know.
US-made platform.
I got it. Like we could charge Bitcoin or we could charge Ether. I don't have to report my income. We could do
coin or whatever it's called. You could do all the cryptocurrencies.
And then maybe I could like I could charge people to pay me in Gerber coin because I create my own digital tokens or something crazy. So when you've got this, I can tell you what we see is that there is a tremendous need, again, for the prevention side, with Checkpoint has a wealth of skills. You can contact Angel, put you in touch with Brian and his team. There's the detection side that once it's come in, how do you mitigate that? And we also know Checkpoint works very closely with some of the storage backup players to at least maybe help you recover that data. You know, the key takeaway here a lot at Angel Beat is, look, one of the ways to avoid paying ransomware is to simply restore backups. And that, if you architect correctly, which means you literally unplug your backup from your network once you do it every night. So you're back, there's
Air gapping. Yes, totally air gapping. Yes.
Yeah. So you need to, the challenge though that people forget is, and you alluded to this, is they are not just encrypting your data, they're taking it. And, you know, if you look at some of the, I remember like 5-6 years ago with Sony Theaters or Sony Music or Entertainment, I forget the exact name of the subsidiary, where they took the data and then they broadcast that data. And in many respects, the broadcasting of the data was almost worse than the encrypting of it. So
yeah, what if I told you that the encryption is not that it's not important and it is an attention getter? We in many cases, that's how we see it. What if I told you that it's the exfiltration of data and the threat of this, let's say, stealing customer data and calling your customers, like robocalling them, is actually greater leverage than decrypting drives? So we know there's some great players in the ecosystem that are doing air gap backups in cloud, yeah. And it's a very needed solution. But forget the backups for a second. How do you even trust? So when the ransomware attacker hears that you're not paying the ransom because you don't need to, because you have air gap backups, you know, you might irk them to the point where they'll say, well, we're going to disclose your data, we're going to sell your data, yeah. And you're going to pay the ransom anyway. You understand that, right? So if you don't pay the ransom, that's all fine and good. But just so you know, we're going to sell your data. And in fact, we have many examples where data, little pieces of that data has been posted publicly so that the company that's been hit can see that it's not just a threat. So I think you're right. And maybe even in time, what would happen if the encryption piece of it simply went away? I mean, they would just exfiltrate data and threaten, maybe they would threaten to encrypt, but maybe that the exfiltration and the publicizing and the selling becomes the more important leverage. Don't know, but it's a good point and definitely dangerous.
So when you look at the very scary landscape, make sure you take advantage of tools and services that Checkpoint offers with the ransomware, which is really the major threat of the day. But as you look ahead, I think you alluded to issues like IoT security risk, you know, the world of industrial technology, where we used to have things like programmable logic controllers, and I'll date myself, or ASICs, or application-specific integrated circuits. Now, the good thing about those kind of solutions where you could stop the programming of a PCL, or you never change the software in an ASIC, is that it used to be, you get a custom program, it controls your dams and your power transmission, and it sort of never changes. It's purpose built until you get something new in 5 years, or in the case of software, it's like you install it and maybe 3 years later, then you get the new upgrade if you want. And so everything was more static and everything gets more dynamic. So now when you alluded to the whole industrial world where now that has to be part of your IP network. And again, that's what we see a lot. And maybe you could comment on.
Well, why don't we take the best real world example of this that exists in modern time, and it's a public case story. I don't need to hide any names, all right? Okay. I'm talking about the Colonial Pipeline, all right? In the Colonial Pipeline attack, the origin and focus of the attack was their IT network, not their OT. But there's things that people don't know about what happened here. This is not available to the naked eye, but if you go a little deeper, you can find this out. The plans for the pipeline itself, the actual pipeline itself, were in process of being exfiltrated by the attacker. I don't think they were successful doing it. I think they stopped it midstream. But attackers could have conceivably gotten the plans to the pipeline. And admittedly, maybe the OT network was mostly air-gapped, but there had to be points where there was connectivity into some IP network, you know, internal. Had they hopped that sort of that air gap somehow, had they done it with the plans to the pipeline, you're talking about a science fiction ending, like when all the city goes dark at the end of the science fiction movie, and you know, like the stuff that bad dreams are made of. Now that didn't happen here, but the Colonial Pipeline attack was a good example of how that truly for purposes of leverage getting the plans for an OT network, and it was not far-fetched. It was proved that had somebody not seen this happening, that it would have been done, would have been a very, very scary moment and possibly a proof of concept that nobody wanted, which was controlling valves in the pipeline, or in this case, controlling electrical switches. And you hit the point right on the head, and here it is. The switches themselves, the valve controllers, are being controlled by systems that are not frequently updated. Security rarely is the focus of these vendors. So look for solutions that can sit in the middle and actively look at securing your IoT. It's a requirement now. It's not a nice to have or a must have, or I'm sorry, not a nice to have or a want to have. It's a must have. And I think that the Colonial Pipeline provides a good case study of that.
I think that's great. And the good thing is, when you're going to be speaking again later this year into 2022, we're going to hear more about these security as it relates, as you said, to industrial or industrial technology or occupational technology, and maybe
operational. You could call it, we call it the OT network, but it basically the elevators, the healthcare systems, the valve pipelines, the electrical switches, the stuff that most conventionally are not thought of as, well, no one could ever attack that, right? Wrong. That's a major vector of focus for not only for Check Point, but for the industry as a whole.
Good. And that's a good thing about having all those researchers there in your facility to monitor these things. But if you look at that in general, there's two big things. Tell me if I've got this right. Everything's becoming IP network connected. So many things, and so many of these devices are not protected. And the other complementary issue is that as they become IP connected, they're also being software updatable. I don't know if that's really a true word. So as you're constantly putting out updates and you're constantly connecting systems or hardware that wasn't previously designed for this, like there was never a checkpoint firewall designed for an electrical or pipeline control room. Those are new
protocols are different protocols. And we made some acquisitions in the space, but I will say the one thing that in addition to what you said, which was dead on accurate, the systems that are being updated regularly need a security focus to them. And I think the assumption that we're making, and again, in an industry of innovation, is that these OT manufacturers, that's their focus. They know how to make valves. They know how to make X-ray machines. Their focus isn't advanced persistent threats or ransomware. They know nothing about that. And I'm sure they're very apologetic and would love to know more. But they depend on, again, the airbags and the seatbelts that Check Point provides in those areas as well.
So we look forward to hearing about these new solutions. I was reflecting and listening to your comments there, Brian, about a similar dynamic with regard to what I might have referred to in the past as high volume copiers are generally referred to as multifunction devices now, MFDs.
Correct.
And
yes.
So and this was like at an AngelBeat seminar, it must have been 10, 12 years ago, where they suddenly started integrating copy machines that historically were standalone, non-connected devices. Then they put in, we've got a high printing demand. We'll just put this huge Xerox HP printer and put it on our network, Lexmark, whatever it is. And the problem was those printers, and I'm dating myself, all had a POTS fax line. Yeah. And they also had some digital storage.
People don't know what a POTS line is. They don't know it's just a plain old phone. They don't even know anymore.
I know, I'm dating myself. But what happened is that, and again, like I was just reading about, like Japan is probably still the largest user of fax machines, and they're even trying to get away from it. But back in the day when there were fax machines, and back in the day when people had landlines and stuff like that, faxes were a big deal. But it's analogous to this situation because they didn't start putting these multifunction devices behind the firewall. They weren't designed to be IP addressable. And the fax machine offered a conduit for cyber criminals even 10, 12 years ago. They've been around for a while to then hack your network, to get those images when you're getting ready to go public and you're printing up all these prospectuses. They've got that same information. They know what it's being priced at. This didn't get as much visibility 10 years ago as Colonial Pipeline or Kaseya, but we heard about it at some of our AngelBeat seminars when we had one of these major printing companies speaking, and they quickly got on the game. And so when you come to AngelBeat, we're going to get experts like Brian. We're going to make sure we stay leading edge to keep you ahead of the curve, because we want to make sure that at AngelBeat, you can hear from experts like Brian, you can understand where you need to deploy your resources, and you keep your name out of the headlines. And what we're seeing as well, and I think you alluded to this, we see this when AWS, Microsoft, Google, some of Checkpoint's key strategic partners speak, the roles of individuals just racking and stacking servers or updating desktops by walking around to different workstations, that's all going away. And the similar thing, security is in such high demand, you now have some staff, and we encourage everyone to think of themselves as strategic architects. And then what you can do is say, okay, I don't really need so much to be the ransomware expert, but I do need to then say, okay, let me hire Checkpoint to be my security experts to configure things, just like I'm going to hire one of the big cloud providers to start taking over my infrastructure. As your roles are changing, you're not so much doing the work per se, you're planning out the work architecturally. And that's one of the things we try and emphasize at AngelBeat is you can't do it all. You need to leverage the Bryans of the world, the Checkpoint research of the world. That way you're going to be more successful in your career. Your company's going to be more secure and flexible, and you will stay out of the headlines. And in security, there is absolutely a thing. Some people like in PR, they said there's no such thing as bad press. I guarantee you in IT security,
yes, there's
definitely bad press.
Ron, on behalf of all of your partners and customers that regularly attend your events, which are amazing and are doing a great benefit to the community, thank you for trying to keep all of us out of the headlines and keeping us all from having our CNN moment, because believe me, the less press we get as IT security professionals, the better off we are.
That's great.
So thank you for that.
All right. Thanks again. We'll end this great webinar, this great fireside chat. We'll look forward to seeing Brian at some of our events. Make sure you can always follow. Brian, what's your Twitter handle? I'm sure you've got yours.
I'll put it in it. Yeah, we'll publish it out. I'll publish all that stuff out. You can follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter. So I'll
follow that, and
yeah, we'll
hear him at future.
But reach out to AngelBeat. Reach out to Ron. He's the best way to get to us. Ron maintains very, very close relationships with his partners and a great community of vendors and solution providers. So by all means, we'll go that way. Okay.
All right, great. Thanks everyone very much. All right, bye-bye now, Brian.
Bye-bye.
Look forward to seeing you on the road.